Welcome back to Sioux Gospel Story Channel, where the greatest stories of the Bible come to life. Tonight, we journey into the story of Joshua. Please remember to subscribe now and join us as we bring scripture to life. Episode 1: Joshua, born into chains, chosen by God. The cries of Hebrew slaves echoed through the scorching lands of Egypt. Under the cruel rule of Pharaoh, the Israelites suffered day and night, whipped beneath the burning sun, forced to build cities for a kingdom that hated them. Among those slaves was a young boy named Hosea, the one the world would later know as Joshua. No one looking at him then would have imagined he would one day command armies, stop the sun in the sky, and lead God's people into the promised land. But heaven already knew his name. Joshua grew up hearing whispers about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who promised his people freedom. Yet year after year, the change remained. Then everything changed. One day rumors spread like wildfire through the slave camps. A Hebrew raised in Pharaoh's palace has returned. His name was Moses. Soon strange events began shaking Egypt. Rivers turned to blood. Frogs flooded homes. Darkness covered the land. Fear gripped the Egyptians as plague after plague struck the kingdom. Joshua watched it all with wide eyes. And then came the night no Israelite would ever forget. Families huddled inside their homes while lamb's blood marked their doorposts. Outside, death swept through Egypt. By morning, Pharaoh finally broke. "Go," he commanded. After centuries of slavery, Israel walked free. Joshua marched out of Egypt beside millions of former slaves, carrying hope for the first time in his life. But freedom came with danger. As Israel camped beside the Red Sea, thunderous panic erupted behind them. Pharaoh had changed his mind. Egyptian chariots raced across the desert. The sea blocked Israel's escape. People screamed. Children cried. Panic spread through the camp. Then Moses lifted the staff of God. The wind roared. The sea split apart. Walls of water rose into the sky while dry ground appeared beneath their feet. Joshua stepped into the impossible. The Israelites crossed safely while Egypt's army charged behind them. But when the last Israelite reached the other side, the waters crashed down, swallowing Pharaoh's army forever. That day Joshua learned something he would never forget: no enemy was greater than the God of Israel. As the years passed in the wilderness, Joshua stayed close to Moses. While others complained, rebelled, and doubted God, Joshua listened, learned, and remained faithful. He climbed partway up Mount Sinai with Moses when the mountain shook with fire and thunder. He guarded the sacred tent where Moses spoke with God. Quietly, patiently, God was preparing a warrior, not just with weapons, but with faith. Because one day, Joshua would face giants, collapsing walls, enemy kings, and impossible battles. And when that day came, the former slave from Egypt would become the leader of God's people. Bible references: Exodus 1-24. Episode 2: Joshua's first battle, the war against Amalek. The wilderness was harsh. Hot winds whipped through the camp of Israel as millions of people struggled through the barren desert. Food was scarce. Water was precious. Every day tested their survival. Then came the attack. Without warning, the Amalekites descended upon Israel like wolves stalking the weak. They targeted the weary, the elderly, and those falling behind. Fear spread rapidly through the camp. Israel had escaped Egypt. But they were not warriors. Most had never held a sword in their lives. That's when Moses turned to Joshua. "Choose men," Moses said, his voice steady. "Tomorrow you will fight Amalek." This would be Joshua's first battle. The young warrior gathered men from the tribes of Israel. Farmers, shepherds, former slaves. None were trained soldiers. But Joshua did not hesitate. At sunrise, the battlefield erupted in chaos. Steel clashed. Dust filled the air. Men shouted and fell beneath flashing blades. Below in the valley, Joshua fought fiercely against Amalek's army. But high above the battlefield stood Moses on a hill, holding the staff of God in his hands. Something mysterious began happening. Whenever Moses raised the staff, Israel pushed forward. When Moses' arms grew tired and lowered, Amalek surged back with terrifying force. Joshua noticed the pattern. This battle was not being won by strength alone. It was heaven fighting for Israel. As the day dragged on, Moses' arms trembled with exhaustion. So Aaron and Hur brought a stone for him to sit on. One stood on each side, lifting his arms toward the sky. Below, Joshua charged once more into battle. The Israelites roared with renewed courage. The Amalekites began to break. Finally, as the sun dipped low beyond the desert hills, Joshua drove the enemy into complete defeat. Israel had won its first great battle. But the victory revealed a deeper truth: Joshua was no ordinary man. God was raising a leader, a warrior whose faith would one day shake nations. Bible reference, Exodus 17 verses 8 to 16. Episode 3, The 12 Spies, Giants and the Land. The wilderness years dragged on endlessly. Day after day, Israel wandered beneath the blazing desert sun. But finally, after months of travel, the people arrived at the border of the promised land, Canaan. The land God promised Abraham. A land flowing with milk and honey. A land Israel had dreamed about for generations. Excitement swept through the camp. At God's command, Moses selected 12 men, one from each tribe, to secretly scout the land. Among them stood Joshua. Strong, fearless, faithful. For 40 days the spies traveled through Canaan. They crossed fertile valleys overflowing with vineyards. They explored mighty cities protected by towering walls. Everywhere they looked, the land was rich and beautiful. But there was a problem. The people living there were powerful. Some cities looked impossible to conquer. And then the spies saw them. Giants. Massive warriors descended from Canaan. Men so tall and terrifying that fear gripped the spies' hearts. When the 12 returned to Israel's camp, crowds gathered anxiously around them. At first the report sounded wonderful. It truly flows with milk and honey. They even carried a cluster of grapes so enormous it took 2 men to carry it on a pole. But suddenly the mood shifted. 10 spies began spreading fear through the camp. The people are too strong. The cities are fortified. We looked like grasshoppers beside them. Terror spread like wildfire. Panic erupted among the Israelites. Cries echoed through the night as people wept and cursed Moses. Some even wanted to return to Egypt. But 2 men stood against the fear: Joshua and Caleb. Joshua stepped forward boldly before the people. "Do not rebel against the Lord," he cried. "Do not fear the people of the land. The Lord is with us." But the crowd refused to listen. Some even threatened to stone Joshua and Caleb to death. Then suddenly, the glory of God appeared over the tabernacle. Silence fell across the camp. God declared judgment upon Israel for their unbelief. That generation would never enter the promised land. Instead, they would wander the wilderness for 40 years until every fearful rebel had died. Only Joshua and Caleb would survive to inherit the land. 40 years. All because fear became greater than faith. But Joshua never forgot that moment. While others saw giants, Joshua saw God. Bible references, Numbers 13 to 14. Episode 4 of Moses dies, Joshua rises. 40 years passed. The older generation faded away in the wilderness exactly as God had said. One by one, the rebels died beneath the desert sands. But Joshua survived. Now older and seasoned by years of hardship, he stood beside Moses overlooking the promised land. The Jordan River shimmered below them. Beyond it lay Canaan. The dream was finally within reach. But tragedy was coming. Moses, the great prophet who confronted Pharaoh and parted the Red Sea, would not enter the land. Because of one act of disobedience years earlier, God told Moses his journey would end before crossing over. The news devastated Israel. For decades, Moses had been their leader, their guide, their connection to God. Who could possibly replace him? Then God called Joshua forward. Before all Israel, Moses laid his hands upon him and transferred leadership to the warrior who had remained faithful through every trial. Joshua likely felt the crushing weight of responsibility. How could anyone follow Moses? But then God spoke directly to him. Be strong and courageous. Again God said it. Be strong and very courageous. And a third time, do not be afraid. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Those words burned into Joshua's soul. Soon after, Moses climbed Mount Nebo alone. From the mountain peak, God showed him the promised land stretching into the distance. Rolling hills, flowing rivers, ancient cities. The promise fulfilled at last. Then Moses died. The great prophet was gone. Israel mourned for 30 days. And during that time, Joshua prepared. No longer an assistant, no longer a student. Now he would lead the people of God into war. Bible references: Deuteronomy 31 to 34, Joshua 1. Episode 5, Crossing the Jordan, the impossible path. The Jordan River raged before them. Overflowing from spring floods, the waters churned violently across Israel's path into Canaan. There were no bridges, no boats, no way across. Behind them stood millions of Israelites waiting anxiously for Joshua's command. Ahead of them lay the promised land. Joshua sought the Lord. Then the command came, have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant into the river. It sounded impossible. The Ark represented the presence of God himself. The priests would have to step directly into the raging waters first. No miracle would happen beforehand. Faith had to move first. At dawn, the priests lifted the ark onto their shoulders and slowly approached the riverbank. The current thundered before them. The people held their breath. Then, the priests stepped into the water. Instantly, the impossible happened. The Jordan River stopped flowing. Far upstream, the waters piled up into a massive wall while the riverbed dried beneath their feet. Gasps spread across the nation. Joshua stared in awe. Just like the Red Sea years earlier, God had opened another path. The priests stood motionless in the middle of the river while the entire nation crossed safely on dry ground. Children ran through the riverbed. Families hurried across. Millions passed through the impossible. Joshua then ordered 12 men, one from each tribe, to gather stones from the riverbed. These stones would become a memorial so future generations would remember what God had done. When the priests finally stepped out of the river carrying the ark, the waters crashed back into place. The miracle was complete. News spread rapidly throughout Canaan. The God of Israel had returned. And fear began falling upon Israel's enemies. Bible references: Joshua 3 to 4. Episode 6, Jericho, the day the walls fell. Jericho stood like a fortress of doom. Massive walls towered above the city, thick enough for houses to rest upon them. Soldiers watched from the battlements while the gates remained tightly shut. No one entered. No one escaped. Joshua studied the city carefully. How could Israel possibly conquer such a fortress? Then God gave Joshua a battle plan so strange it made no military sense. For 6 days, Israel was to march around the city once each day in silence while priests blew ram's horns before the Ark of the Covenant. No attacks. No ladders. No battering rams. Just marching. The people obeyed. Day after day, the Israelites circled Jericho silently while the city's defenders mocked them from above. The tension grew heavier with each passing day. Then came the 7th day. Before sunrise, Joshua gathered the people. Today the Lord will give you the city. Israel marched around Jericho once, twice, 3 times. By the 7th lap, hearts pounded with anticipation. Then Joshua shouted, "Shout! for the Lord has given you the city." Trumpets blasted. The people roared. Suddenly the ground trembled violently. Cracks split through the massive walls. Stone exploded outward. The mighty walls of Jericho collapsed into ruins before Israel's eyes. Panic erupted inside the city. Israel charged forward from every direction. Jericho fell. But amid the destruction, one family was spared. Rahab, the woman who once hid Israel's spies, was rescued exactly as promised. Smoke rose into the sky as Israel stood victorious. The impossible fortress had fallen, not by human strength, but by the power of God. Bible reference, Joshua 6. Episode 7, The Sin of Achan, Israel's shocking defeat. Victory at Jericho made Israel feel unstoppable. The mighty walls had fallen. Fear had spread across Canaan. Joshua's name was becoming legendary. But hidden beneath the celebration, danger was growing. Before Jericho fell, God gave one strict command: do not take any treasure from the city for yourselves. Everything belonged to the Lord. But one man secretly disobeyed. A man named Achan saw beautiful Babylonian garments, silver, and gold among the ruins. Greed consumed him. Hidden from everyone else, he stole the treasure and buried it beneath his tent. No one knew, or so he thought. Soon after Jericho's victory, Joshua prepared to attack a much smaller city called Ai. Compared to Jericho, Ai seemed weak. Confident scouts returned with an easy report: only a few thousand men are needed. Israel marched forward expecting another quick victory. Instead, disaster struck. The men of Ai suddenly counterattacked with fierce violence. Israel's soldiers panicked. Warriors fled in terror down the rocky hillsides while enemy soldiers chased them. 36 Israelites died. Shock spread throughout the camp. Joshua collapsed before the ark of God in anguish. "Why has this happened?" he cried. Then God revealed the horrifying truth: Israel has sinned. The nation had lost God's protection because hidden sin remained among them. The next morning Joshua gathered all Israel tribe by tribe. The tension was unbearable. Finally the guilty man was exposed. Achan stepped forward trembling. He confessed everything. The stolen treasures were uncovered beneath his tent exactly where he hid them. Judgment followed swiftly. It was a terrifying lesson for Israel. Secret sin carries devastating consequences. But once the sin was removed, God restored his favor. Joshua prepared another attack against Ai. This time, God gave him a strategy. During the night, Joshua secretly positioned soldiers behind the city while the main army approached openly. When Ai's warriors rushed out to attack again, Israel pretended to flee. The enemy chased them recklessly away from the city. Then Joshua raised his spear toward Ai. Hidden Israelite soldiers stormed into the empty city and set it ablaze. Smoke rose into the sky. The men of Ai turned around too late. They were trapped between two Israelite armies. Complete victory followed. Joshua learned an unforgettable truth: without God, even small enemies become impossible. But with God, victory always returns. Bible references, Joshua 7-8. Episode 8, The Day the Sun Stood Still. The kings of Canaan were terrified. Jericho had fallen. Ai was destroyed. Israel kept advancing deeper into the land. But one city made a shocking decision. The people of Gibeon tricked Joshua into making a peace treaty with them. When neighboring Amorite kings heard about it, fury exploded. How dare Gibeon surrender to Israel? 5 powerful kings united their armies and marched to destroy Gibeon. Desperate messengers raced to Joshua's camp. "Come quickly. Save us." Joshua did not hesitate. Throughout the night, Israel marched for miles across rough mountain terrain toward Gibeon. By dawn, Joshua launched a surprise attack. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Swords clashed. Men screamed. Dust filled the air. God himself fought beside Israel. As the Amorite armies fled, enormous hailstones crashed down from heaven, killing many of the enemy soldiers. But the battle was not finished. The sun was beginning to set. Darkness would allow the enemy kings to escape. Joshua looked toward the heavens and prayed one of the boldest prayers ever spoken. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Ajalon. Then something impossible happened. The sun stopped moving. Daylight remained in the sky. Time itself seemed frozen. Israel continued fighting hour after hour until complete victory was secured. The 5 Amorite kings fled and hid inside a cave. Joshua's men trapped them inside with large stones. Later Joshua brought the kings out before all Israel. One by one, the enemy rulers were executed. Fear spread through the land like wildfire. The nations of Canaan realized they were not merely fighting Israel. They were fighting the God of heaven, and no one could stand against him. Bible reference, Joshua 10. Episode 9, Joshua conquers the Promised Land. War consumed Canaan for years. Kings formed alliances. Armies gathered by the thousands. Entire cities prepared for battle. But Joshua kept advancing. In the north, a massive coalition of enemy kings united against Israel near the waters of Merom. Their armies were enormous. Horses thundered across the plains. Iron chariots filled the valleys. The enemy looked unstoppable. But God told Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them." Joshua launched a sudden surprise attack. The enemy armies collapsed into confusion. Israel drove them across the land, destroying the coalition completely. One by one, city after city fell before Israel. The long-awaited promise to Abraham was finally becoming reality. After years of battle, peace finally settled over the land. Joshua, now old and battle-scarred, began dividing the territory among the 12 tribes of Israel. Families finally received homes, fields, vineyards, cities. After generations of slavery and wilderness wandering, Israel finally possessed the Promised Land. And Scripture declares one of the most powerful statements in the Bible: not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. Joshua had witnessed it with his own eyes. God keeps his promises. Always. Bible references, Joshua 11-21. Episode 10, Joshua's Final Challenge. Joshua had grown old. His hair whitened with age. His body carried the scars of countless battles. But his faith remained unshaken. Knowing death was near, Joshua gathered the leaders of Israel for one final message. The atmosphere was heavy with emotion. This was the farewell of the man who led them into the Promised Land. Joshua stood before the people and reminded them of everything God had done. How God delivered them from Egypt. How the Red Sea parted. How Jericho's walls collapsed. How enemy kings fell before them. Every victory came from God. Then Joshua gave a solemn warning. Israel was now surrounded by pagan nations and false gods. If you turn away from the Lord, Joshua warned, disaster will come upon you. The people listened silently. Then Joshua delivered the words that would echo through history forever: choose this day whom you will serve. The crowd stood frozen. Would they remain faithful to God? Then Joshua declared boldly, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people cried out together, we also will serve the Lord. Joshua renewed the covenant between Israel and God. Then he placed a large stone beneath an oak tree as a witness to the promise the people had made that day. It was a powerful final moment. The old warrior had fought his battles. Now the future of Israel rested in the hands of the next generation. Bible references, Joshua 23-24. Episode 11, The Death of Joshua, the end of a legend. The great warrior was nearing the end. Joshua had lived through slavery in Egypt, the miracles of Moses, the wilderness, the battles of Canaan. He had seen the power of God unlike almost anyone else in history. at 110 years old, his journey was completed. The people gathered quietly around their aging leader. This was the man who marched through the Jordan River, the man who brought down Jericho, the man who commanded the sun to stand still, a leader unlike any other. Then Joshua died. Israel buried him in the land God had promised generations earlier. The nation mourned deeply. For many years afterward, Israel continued serving the Lord because the people remembered Joshua's faith and leadership. But Joshua's story became far greater than military victories. He became a symbol of courage, faith, obedience, perseverance. He began life as a slave with no future. Yet God transformed him into one of the greatest leaders in biblical history. And even centuries later, his story still inspires the world. Because Joshua's life proves one unforgettable truth: faith in God can turn ordinary people into legends. Bible reference, Joshua 24 verses 29 to 31. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode in the greatest story ever told. And remember, with God, even the impossible becomes possible.